They claim that by putting rocks in the bottom of the pot, it improves drainage. That is fiction. It has no benefits at all. All it does is make the container shallower because of Darcy's law. Darcy's law of soil physics says that water will move readily from a coarse textured material to a fine textured material. It will not move from a fine textured material to a coarse textured material until it's virtually saturated. So if you put rocks in the bottom of the pot or any other thing that raises this base, and then you have fine textured material above the coarse textured material at the bottom of the rocks, it doesn't work. You just wasted space that would otherwise, because of the added depth, that would help the plant grow in the container. I want to talk about plants growing in containers and water relationship and aeration of the root system. Plants are native to a wide variety of soils and conditions in nature, but no plant is native to a container. It's a totally artificial growing condition for the convenience of moving plants around. Remember, Mother Nature didn't allow for transplanting, but by growing plants in containers, particularly if it's a container where the roots can't circle and the mix is proper in terms of water and aeration, that's where we're going now, then you can grow it and plant it and have a much higher likelihood of success in a landscape or wherever you would choose to plant than if you did bare root or balled and burlap plants. Water moves through a container just like water moves in soil up to a point. Water moves in soil down to a point where you get a hard pan, or it slows as the soil is more dense, or you hit rocks or some other material. In this container, this is the bottom. This is the hard pan. This is the stopping point for water. Now, as water drains down through here, if it's fine particles, the saturated zone may be halfway, and you don't grow many plants if half of the soil mix is saturated with water. If you add something more coarse in texture, it drains better and so forth. But one of the things I want to show you here is how much water is retained. I've got a pan full of water. I've got an ordinary sponge that has spaces for air and spaces for holding water. And it's 2 inches thick by 6 inches by 8 inches. I'm going to press it down into the water until it is saturated. It contains all the water it's going to. And I'm going to lift it out here and put it on this wire frame. And some water drains out, but you probably can't see it, but there's a line right here. And if I could hold this level, it'd be better. But there's a saturated zone. So at 2 inches depth, with this porosity, about 3/4 of this is drained. Is that all the water that's going to drain out of that unit? Well, let's see. If I change it to where it is 6 inches deep, lots of additional water drains out. But look what happens at the bottom. That saturated zone at the bottom is the same depth as it was when the pot was 2 inches deep. And then if I change it to where the pot is now 8 inches deep, lots more water drains out. And that saturated zone is the same depth as it was with the 2-inch or 6-inch deep. The depth of the container is a major factor in how much water is being held, how much aeration is available for plant root growth, and aeration is a key factor. You think of oxygen affecting leaves and the carbon dioxide being produced and released, but in the container, one of the key agents you need to control is aeration. Roots require oxygen to function, whether it's in nature or in a container. And so as you look at this, you say, well, gee, it must be all the water's drained out. Well, let's see. No, there's still a lot of water in there. And this is the water that would sustain the plant until the next irrigation cycle. Drainage is a key factor. This is the bottom of the pot, is the thing that controls drainage, because it interrupts the downward flow. Years and years ago, I simply took some containers, cut the bottoms out, put the same mix in here with the bottom out versus with the bottom in. Set this on the ground. These dried out, boom. These held much more water, which speaks of how water moves. The best growing mix for plants in containers that I have been using for the last 30 years after hundreds of experiments my students and I did is approximately 3 parts ground pine bark, 1 part peat moss, and 1 part sand by volume. Think about the components. Pine bark is irregular platy materials. Peat is long, slender strands. Sand is spherical. So with those 3 different shapes, you don't have the opportunity for compression. Each one helps hold the other one apart. And by changing that combination, and we ultimately found that the 3-1-1 gave us about 20% drainable pore space, which left us with 80% with holding moisture, but still holding more water for plant growth. Change the components to get that aeration factor right. But when you get it right, growth will accelerate, problems will disappear, disease problems will disappear. I haven't drenched a plant in a container with a fungicide in at least 20 years, 30 years. We don't need it because it's not a problem. The more drainage is restricted because of the components that you choose, the more you favor development of pathogens and discourage good root growth. Good, healthy roots have a natural resistance to being colonized by pathogens. So drainage is important, and stopping roots from circling is important. And with that, we'll go to a different subject.